So, how did life occur on Earth in the very beginning? In Bio 1, we've talked about cells, and you know that cells come from other cells, but where did the first cell come from? So, scientists have a hypothesis that there are a minimum of about 4 steps to go from primordial soup to possibility of life, right? So the first step would need some kind of synthesis of organic molecules, right? So we need to make the building blocks that will eventually make life. After that, we need to take those small molecules and somehow polymerize them into macro molecules, right? If we could do that, we'd make some small molecules, get those together to make them into large macromolecules. Then we need something that looks like a cell. So those macromolecules might be able to arrange themselves into something that looks like a cell, right? It has an outside and it has an inside. And then once we have a cell, or just even a vesicle, right, a membrane with an outside and an inside, we might be able to have that self-replicating, right, if this vesicle can replicate itself. So we're going to need some kind of replicating, not just vesicle, but genetic material. And once we have genetic material, well, then natural selection can work on it, and we might be able to eventually get to something that resembles living things. So we can't prove this theory or hypothesis, but what we can do is kind of look at each of these steps and look at the plausibility of them, replicate these situations in lab and say, hey, is this something that could have happened? So the Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Again, you don't need to remember things like how many billion years ago stuff was. But the first step we need to do was, can we make simple organic molecules? And in 1953, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey demonstrated. So what they did was they took this large glassware contraption and they filled it with the gases that were thought to be found on early Earth. And they shocked it with electricity, thinking that something like UV radiation or lightning might provide energy for reactions to occur. And what they were able to do is they were able to create simple amino acids and some other organic molecules, which is great. That means, hey, we have some organic molecules that could have been made in things like lightning strikes. And these types of experiments have been repeated many, many times with different environments. So reducing environments, neutral environments, non-reducing atmospheres, all of these types of possible atmospheres from early Earth have been replicated and have all shown to be able to make organic molecules. There's a couple of other places that we might have gotten organic molecules from, things like situations near erupting volcanoes might have been able to form things like amino acids. This picture you can see is a deep-sea hydrothermal vent. So this is where the heat from the Earth radiates up through the ocean floor. And as it does, it is providing the energy needed for reactions to occur to potentially develop organic molecules that then would float up from the sea. Another source might be meteorites. This isn't likely a major source because meteorites would be fairly rare. But there was a meteorite that landed in Australia called the Murchison meteorite in 1969 that's shown to have had lipids and other organic molecules and simple sugars and even nucleic acids inside of it. So as far as the requirements go for our theory, yeah, step one, we can definitely say that the atmosphere of early Earth had the potential to synthesize small organic molecules. So the next question is, could these small organic molecules have developed into larger macromolecules by polymerizing into large carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids? And there is evidence of this that's replicable in labs. So in 2009, So one study in 2009 found RNA monomers that could be produced. So those, again, are just simple molecules. And then what they did was they took these monomers and they dripped them onto hot surfaces, sand, clay, rock. These are things that are definitely plausible to have been found on early Earth. And they polymerized. So they went from monomers into polymers, right? Those are macromolecules. So evidence from the lab says that, yeah, this is plausible. We could have, in some situation on early Earth, had small organic molecules that somehow polymerized into large chains or macromolecules. So then the next question is, could we make something that resembles a cell, right? Could these early macromolecules have spontaneously formed into what we now consider to be protocells? And so what has been done in the lab is that when lipids are put into water, they self-organize, spontaneous means without energy, they just do it on their own, into a vesicle-like structure. And this makes sense because lipids don't like water, so they would form the circle to keep themselves away from water by forming a lipid bilayer, which should sound familiar, right? That's what cell membranes are made of. Researchers also found that by adding montmorillonite, which is, this is a clay given off by volcanic ash, which would have been plentiful on early Earth, that the rate of vesicle formation, right, so the number of vesicles formed per time, was drastically increased. So yeah, this is another situation that was likely on early Earth to be able to produce something that looks like a vesicle where there's a lipid layer on the outside and then fluid on the inside. And what this means is that now I've got kind of a containerized space. I might be able to do things like metabolize energy by bringing kind of food in and metabolizing it somehow. And then these might also be able to replicate, right, where they could pinch off into two smaller vesicles, and now I went from one big protocell to two smaller cells. So yeah, we might be able to take macromolecules and arrange them into some kind of cell shape. And we know that one of the key characteristics of living on Earth is that you have to be able to not only reproduce and metabolize energy, but you have to be able to evolve, which means we have to have some kind of heritable genetic material. And it was likely that on Earth, the first genetic material was RNA, not DNA. I'll say that again. The first genetic material on Earth was RNA. So there's evidence of early organic molecules called ribozymes, and these are catalysts, meaning that they could catalyze metabolic reactions, but they can also self-replicate. So we've seen evidence of self-replicating RNA molecules. In 2013, we found these in a lab. So scientists found that RNA could, with the right circumstances, inside of a vesicle, self-replicate. So now we have the means of taking some kind of early protocell with some kind of self-replicating RNA and producing offspring to pass its genes on. And now we have a mechanism for natural selection to be able to act on. So back to the checklist, yeah, it is completely plausible to develop some kind of replicating genetic material, which was likely RNA, not DNA, for early Earth.